Shotgun is best utilized when combined with visual media, and the rich set of collaboration and review tools depend on the transfer of that media to and from local computers. Several built-in tools handle this transfer, like the drag-and-drop upload or click-to-download options available from the web GUI. There are also tools in our integrations, like the Publisher app, which can upload media and attach it to a version, and RV's Submission tool, which does the same thing. But you or your team may run into situations where these out-of-the-box data transfer features aren't convenient or don't cover your use case, in which case you may want to build your own tools to transfer data files. In this video, I'm going to review the various upload and download methods in the Shotgun Python API. We'll take a look at how Shotgun transcodes media and tracks files, and we'll also explore some alternatives to media transfer. Sometimes it's not necessary to duplicate data if there's a smart way to reference or share it. Let's look at how media files and other file types are uploaded with the web GUI. The first thing to know is that files are tracked with the file entity type. So I'll head over to my project's files list page and click the plus file button. I can drag and drop or choose a file with the browser here. Once the file is uploaded, a file entity is created with its file field pointing to the uploaded file, which is temporarily stored in Shotgun's file serve area. We can see that by pulling down the this file key from the new file entity record. Incidentally, you may have noticed that the file entity type's internal name is attachment. So how long is temporary? How long do we have to wait for the uploaded file to move from the file serve area to its permanent resting place on Amazon's S3 cloud storage service? In my experience, it usually takes 1 to 3 minutes, depending on the file size. Let's time this one. I'll grab the current time, then wait a bit and check our link again. Cool, so it took about 2 minutes. From a practical point of view in your scripts, it shouldn't matter if you use the original file serve URL. After the file is moved to S3, the file serve URL will redirect to S3. And in the near future, files will likely be uploaded directly to S3, so this will all be moot. But it's still good to know what's going on. Okay, let's take a closer look at the URL in the this file key. Here's the path to the file on S3. We've also got an access key ID and an expiration date time that's linked to a request signature. So, because of this layer of security in S3, when we request files from Shotgun, we're granted access to the file on S3, but only temporarily, for 15 minutes. If I run the find one command again, I get a new signature with a new expiration time. Basically, the clock is reset. And of course, if I try to access that URL after 15 minutes, I'll get a 403. Same thing in the web GUI. If I don't refresh a page for 15 minutes and then click on the file link, I'm denied access. To regain access from the GUI, I can simply refresh the page and the signatures for all these files are refreshed. What are all the implications here? Well, hopefully all this S3 transfer and access stuff is transparent most of the time. But as a developer, it's a good idea to understand what's happening behind the scenes so you can avoid some pitfalls. For example, it wouldn't be a good idea to cache these URLs to disk and use them later. I'll also note that we can increase the expiration timeout on your site if it becomes an issue. Just send a note to Shotgun support requesting the change. Next, let's look at some of the info that was automatically entered on my new file entity when the upload was processed. The file name was parsed out, that's nice. The file size was calculated, and the file type was determined. All good bits of information that you can query to save yourself some time. I also want to emphasize that the file entity here is not the file itself. It's simply a record in the Shotgun database that stores info about the file and can generate temporary URLs that point to where the file actually lives on S3 via its file link field. So if I send this entity record to the trash, the file still exists on S3 and is accessible for that 15-minute period via the temp URL. Files are never deleted on S3, and if the file entity record is later revived, it can of course be used to generate new valid URLs. Actually, it'll do that from the trash too. This effectively means that anything you upload to Shotgun is impossible to delete. In a related story, there is no storage limit for your Shotgun site. That said, please play responsibly, limit your carbon footprint when possible, etc. Great, so we've uploaded a file to S3, but its related file entity is just kind of floating in space. It's not related or linked to anything in Shotgun except my Hyperspace Madness project. It's more common to associate an uploaded file with an entity. Maybe you're uploading reference art for an asset, or a video related to a shot or version. Much more useful. And that connection is made through the links field here. So, for example, if I wanted to associate this Excel document we uploaded earlier with the Sven asset, I could just type in Sven. Done. I could also associate it with another entity record of a different type, maybe the 85mm lens entity record. Oops, that's not working. What gives? Well, if you take a look at the links multi-entity field, we can see that it has been configured to only accept certain entity types: asset, note, revision, sequence, etc. So I'll just add my custom camera lens entity type here, and then we're good. Cool, so I've effectively attached the Excel document that lives on S3 to my Sven asset and 85mm lens entities via our file entity. Let's take a look at this from the point of view of the camera lens entity. We know that the Excel doc is attached to the 85mm lens entity, so how do we view the connection? Well, we can't, from the list view here. But if we switch to the detail view and add a tab for file entities, a filter is automatically set up, so we're only looking at the file entities linked to the 85mm lens. Cool. But this seems a little clunky, right? Do we really have to repeat this process of manually linking entities and creating special tabs for every file-to-entity relationship we define? Is there a better way to manage file-entity connections? There is. Another way to attach uploaded files to entities, like our lens entities here, is by creating a file link field and then uploading directly through that field. So let's make a new field, and this time it'll be for the lens's PDF instruction manual instead of some random Excel document. I'll name the field PDF Manual. Now, if I upload the data file from here, I can see the file name right from the list page. And when I go check out the files list page, we can see that, just like before, a file entity was created and associated with the uploaded file. But wonder upon wonder, the entity link has been taken care of for me, and best of all, I can query this file entity from the point of view of the lens in the API. So the moral of the story is, for situations where a single data file should be associated with a single entity in a defined way, do that via a file link field. It'll save you a bunch of work. I also want to point out that with image data types, we get a nice little thumbnail preview when the upload is processed. So now we know how to upload files to S3 and track them with file entities, and also how to create file link fields to conveniently associate file entities with other entities, like assets. Before we move on to the API, I want to talk about media files, images and videos, as opposed to things like Excel documents. We've already seen that some magic happens behind the scenes to create thumbnails from certain image file formats. There's another spot where magic happens, on the version entity's upload movie field. Hopefully you're already familiar with the version entity. It's a special entity used by the web app, RV, and our integrations to enable review workflows. Its fields describe viewable and playable media, and media files from S3 are linked to it via file entities through a file link field called SGUploadedMovie. If you do a lot of Shotgun dev work, you'll become very familiar with this SGUploadedMovie field. So let's see what happens when we upload a movie through this field. First, I'll create a new version. I could just drag in a file here, but for the sake of the demo, I'll add it in the same way we added the PDF manual in our previous example. The first thing you'll notice is I've got a nice little thumbnail. Incidentally, here's a doc that logs currently supported file formats. There also might be a link to it under this video. Okay, besides the thumbnail, if I float over the thumbnail, a film strip thumbnail is activated, and we get a little preview of the video contents. We'll take a closer look at film strips later. And finally, if I click on the thumbnail, the overlay player pops up and displays a version of my media, transcoded and optimized for playback on the web. Okay, so what happened here? Let's lift the curtain. Back here on the Files page, you'll notice, as expected, we have new file entity that's storing the location of our uploaded video file on S3. But we've also got two additional file entities linked to the same version that look like copies of our media. One is a WebM and the other is an H.264 MP4. Where did those come from? Well, these video files are automatically created by a transcoding service on Shotgun servers and are used by the overlay player in the Shotgun web GUI, and other places. Again, these are the files used for playback, not the original uploaded video file. The MP4 file is preferred over the WebM file in RV, and that's usually also the case in our web-based video players, but it ultimately depends on the browser. For example, older versions of Firefox and current versions of Chromium, which is the open source version of Chrome included in some Linux distributions, they may not support the MP4 file format. In that case, the WebM file is played. Incidentally, if a static image is uploaded to the SG uploaded movie field, the transcoder also spits out a JPEG, which is used by the Shotgun web players, although RV, SG Review for iPhone, and the client review site fall back to the MP4. To review, the only time an uploaded media file is transcoded and duplicated like this is when a version's SG uploaded movie field is targeted. Video files uploaded to other spots on Shotgun won't be transcoded or play in the overlay player and will instead be treated like other data files. When you click on them, they download. Let's investigate our versions connection to these new files a bit more. If we head back to the versions page and switch to Detail View, we can view the attached file entities by creating a Files tab. Good start. But if we switch to List View, SG Uploaded Movie is the only field we can display related to the attached media. There's a gotcha here. If we take a look at our versions fields from the API and search for any field with upload in the name, we get a bunch of fields that aren't viewable in the web GUI. Cool, here are the WebM and MP4 upload fields. But why aren't they available from the web GUI? Well, here at Shotgun we've decided it was too confusing to show all the different fields related to uploading and transcoding movies, so we hid some of them. If you run into situations where it would be really helpful to view these fields in the web GUI, you can contact support and request that they be permanently unhidden. But in most cases it's a good thing that your users don't see them and don't try to upload to them. You might have some questions at this point, like, can I upload files directly to the MP4 or WebM fields in my scripts? If so, do I have to do my own transcoding locally? And do I have to upload to all the fields? What happens with thumbnails in the film strip image, etc.? Okay, first, yes, you can do your own transcoding locally, but if you upload a file to the SG uploaded movie field, don't also transcode and upload anything to the WebM or MP4 fields. If you do, those file entities will be replaced by a server-side transcoded version of the SG uploaded movie file. So it's really an either-or situation. Either you upload one file to SG uploaded movie and let our servers do the transcoding and you're done, or if you want to handle your own transcoding locally, then upload one file to the SG uploaded movie MP4 field. I personally wouldn't bother with the WebM field unless you need to support archaic versions of Firefox or a weird Linux distro. The caveat with transcoding yourself is that thumbnails won't be generated automatically, so if you want thumbnail images, you'll have to also generate those locally and upload them to the version's image field. That's where thumbnails are stored. Same thing with the film strip image. You'll have to build the film strip locally and upload it to the film strip image field. Let's take a quick look at film strip images for kicks. So how do we do that? Well, if we query the version's image and film strip image fields, we can see that they're stored on S3. But the difference here is that there's no attachment entity associated with them. They're just raw paths. We already know what the thumbnail image looks like, so let's just download the film strip image and pop it open. So you can see that this might be a little annoying to build yourself. Lots of folks skip that bit if they transcode locally and just generate and upload a thumbnail. You also might have noticed another useful field here. You can query SG uploaded movie transcoding status and it'll tell you what's happening with your transcoding job on the Shotgun servers. It returns an int, A value of 0 means the transcoder is active, 1 means transcoding succeeded, 2 means it failed. Cool, right? For the rest of this video, assume we're talking about using the built-in Shotgun server-side transcoding service, rather than something you've cooked up locally. That's a rabbit hole and out of scope for this video. Email Shotgun support if you go the local transcoding route and need help sorting yourself out. By now you should have a good understanding of how uploaded files are sent to S3, how those files are tracked with the file entity type, attached to other entities, when and how image and video files are transcoded, and why it's all been set up like that. You may chuckle a bit at the why there. I'll only say that Shotgun is a mature product. Over the years, decision-making has responsibly taken into account support for legacy code, which is why things might seem a bit squirrely. But once you know the lay of the land, it's pretty easy to understand, and you should have more than enough to work with. So with all that under our belt, let's move on to the API. Uploading with the API is fairly straightforward. First, grab the relevant project. Next, create an entity to associate with our file. A version is probably a good bet. Of course, you could use an existing entity of any type. The upload method takes 3 arguments: the type and ID of an entity to link to, and the file path to upload. Note that this command returns the ID of the attachment entity that's created, not the attachment dictionary. So if we want to ask Shotgun where the uploaded file ended up, we pull down the new attachment entity, grab the this file key, and take a look at the URL. There it is in our file serve staging area, on its way to S3. Let's check this out in Shotgun. Cool, everything looks good from the files list page, but if we navigate to the versions page, we don't see any reference to our upload in any field. Same problem we had in the web GUI. Okay, let's try this again, but this time we'll pass in a 4th argument, which is the field name, and I'll set it to the SG uploaded movie file link field. Any guesses about what might happen? Right. Targeting the special SG uploaded movie field on a version entity is going to trigger the transcoder. So now if we visit the versions page, we've got a nice link in our SG uploaded movie field, and best of all, we can get the file attachment on the version from the API. And if I switch to the detail view, we can see the transcoded media, view the static thumbnail image, spin the film strip image, and pop open the MP4 in the overlay player. Note that the original file entity is still linked to the version. Before we move on to downloading, let's talk about thumbnails. When you upload a static image to the image field, no attachment entity is created. Instead, the raw URL is stored, and the ID that comes back from the API refers to the temporary folder the thumbnail lives in before it's sent to S3. So it's pretty meaningless. But this can trip up your scripts if you're expecting an attachment ID to come back. Additionally, like the SG uploaded movie field on versions, the image field on all entity types is another special field. Images of supported file types uploaded to the image field are processed and resized so they can be loaded and displayed quickly in the web GUI. The path to these resampled files is what's stored in the image field and is returned when an entity's image field is queried. So what happened to the original high-resolution image we uploaded, right? Well, if you click on the little menu here and choose View Image, you're shown the original image, and you can download it manually. You can also use this little hack to find it. Just go to the thumbnail/full folder for the entity you're looking for, and Shotgun will generate a temporary link to S3. Cool, right? We can use this same trick to download the original high-resolution thumbnails from the API, which I'll show later. Finally, to upload a film strip image, use the film strip image field, which is hidden in the GUI by default, but accessible from the API. There are also special upload thumbnail and upload film strip thumbnail methods, but they're just wrappers around the upload command that hardcode the field name value to image and film strip image, respectively. There's really just one download method to learn: download attachment, but there are a few different and creative ways to use it. First, let's down the file referenced by our 50mm lens's PDF manual attachment. So how do we query the attachment we're after? Well, we could search for the attachment with a find command and add a filter for our lens like this, but the more common and convenient way is to grab an attachment from an entity's file link field. So in this case, I'll query for our 50mm lens's SG-PDF manual field. Cool, so now we have the attachment. Then we can simply drop its ID into the download attachment method. You can also drop the entire attachment entity in here, but I don't recommend doing that because you'll effectively be caching the S3 access key, which could go stale in a long-running script. It's better to just pass in the ID and let Shotgun create a fresh signature. Next, provide a local file path. But what are we going to name the file? Well, luckily you can see that we've got the name of the file nicely parsed out for us here. Great, the path to the downloaded file comes back. Let's pop it open and make sure everything is okay. Cool. Unfortunately, there's no way to report download progress, but you might remember that the file entity stores the file size of uploaded files, so we could do something like this before downloading a file, so our users know when large files slow things down. You could even create a fake progress bar based on your connection speed. Now let's take a look at downloading media from version entities. On a version, you'll usually be interested in the SG uploaded movie field. If we download the attachment here, for example, we get the original file that was uploaded to Shotgun. We may, however, be interested in the transcoded MP4 file, maybe to speed up the download, reduce the local disk space footprint, or improve playback in local tools. In that case, target the SG uploaded movie MP4 field. One quirk here is the file name has a hash prefixed to it, so you may want to swap that with something less ugly, like this. Same thing for the WebM file. Finally, how do we deal with thumbnails and film strips, since neither of them are tracked by the attachment entity? Well, we can use the same download method in a sneaky way. First, let's grab the URL to a thumbnail image. Now we can drop that URL into the download attachment method, but inside a little dictionary with a URL key, like this. Next, same as before, we provide a file path. But what do we name the file this time? There's no nice name key in our image key, so we'll have to either make up a name based on our entity, like this, or we can try to parse out the file name from the URL, like this. Neither is a perfect solution, and both rely on the transcoder always spitting out a JPEG. This same strategy will work for the film strip image field. If I pop open the downloaded image, you can see that this is the small, resized thumbnail. That might be a good thing in some cases, but say you want to download the high-resolution image we originally uploaded to the thumbnail field. Remember that trick I showed earlier for grabbing the high-res image under the thumbnail/full folder? Let's try that again here. Again, we have the naming issue. Let's do this. Any idea why this is not ideal? Right, because we don't know for sure that we've got a JPEG. I mean, maybe you do, and this isn't an issue, but to properly solve the problem, we'll have to download the file with no extension and use something like imgh-hdr to rename it, like this. Done. Phew, it got a little hairy there at the end, but we made it through. At this point, you may be wondering if you can use the download attachment method to download image URLs from other sources outside of Shotgun. The answer is yes. Pretty cool. You got a nice little shortcut for downloading stuff. Sometimes the best way to handle file transfer is to not do it at all. From an engineering best case scenario point of view, data shouldn't be duplicated if it can be avoided. Do you like the idea of one file to rule them all? Confusion is kept to a minimum by avoiding data sync issues, less disk space is used, and one representation ensures a single source of truth. That's the way to go, right? Right? Well, not everyone thinks so. But if you're someone who does think like that, then you probably already have a shared network your team can access. And if that's the case, why would you upload anything to Shotgun? Just so people can view images and play movies in the web player? That seems like overkill, right? Right? All you really need is a way to track a file so folks can find it on your shared file system, view it, and create a conversation around it. Imagine not ever uploading or downloading any media to or from Shotgun. What a huge win. Folks who think like that will enjoy a lively discussion about local file linking, path to movie, and path to frames. Let's take a look at local file linking first. For this to work, you'll need to set up at least one local file storage entity. These entities are primarily used by toolkit integrations and define root storage folders. We recommend folks point primary to a location on a shared file system that will serve as the root for all project data related to production, things like Maya files, image sequences, etc. We'll talk more about local file storage in the toolkit learning videos. Once that's done, you can update an existing entity's file link field by passing in a dictionary with a local path key and file path value. I'll update a new version's SG uploaded movie field. The file path you supply must exist underneath at least one of the defined local file storage entity paths, like the one we defined earlier, or you'll get an error. Now, instead of being uploaded to S3, the local file's path on disk is associated with an attachment entity that stores handy stuff, like the file's name and file type. Let's take a look at this in Shotgun. Okay, here's our new version on the versions list page and our attached local file, and it looks good on the files list page. But what happens when I click on this file? Oops, we're getting a message about missing browser integration. Actually, all we need to do here is download and install Shotgun Desktop and then log in. Now if I refresh the page and click on the file name again, sweet, it opens the file from my local disk. This nice little file browser is also enabled by Shotgun Desktop. So, if folks at your studio need to manually click to open and link local files from the browser GUI, then Shotgun Desktop needs to be installed. Otherwise, if you're only linking local stuff with the API, Shotgun Desktop is not necessary. Unfortunately, local file linking is not a silver bullet. Notably, it doesn't currently work with the Shotgun RV integration. If I choose Play an RV on our version here, I get an unsupported type error. Instead, RV references data from several other fields: SG path to frames, SG path to movie, and SG uploaded movie MP4. Let's take a look at some examples. First, if I upload a version the quote normal way by targeting SG uploaded movie from either the web GUI or the API and launch RV, RV will decide to stream the H.264 MP4 file that the Shotgun server transcoder generated. We can see that is true by checking the inspector and looking at the SG review menu. If the MP4 file is not present, RV won't play either the WebM or the original uploaded movie. It'll just throw an unsupported file error, like the one we saw before. Okay, so what if we want RV to play the original video file directly from disk? In that case, we can fill out the SG path to movie field, like so. Then, when we launch RV, that file is preferred over the MP4. Again, you can see that in the inspector and in the SG review menu. As an aside, one nice thing about the path to movie field, as opposed to local file linking, is the file path can point anywhere. It doesn't have to live underneath a storage area defined by a local file storage entity. Finally, if I'm not happy with MP4 files, perhaps because of color correction issues, banding, or resolution artifacts, I can supply the SG path to frames field with the path to our original local frames. In my case, the video files I've been playing with were generated from this image sequence that came out of Nuke. This time, when I launch RV, I have the option of switching to frames. And if I want RV to launch from Shotgun and prefer the high-res frames by default, I can change that here. Nice! Now anytime I play a version in RV from Shotgun, the high-res frames will be displayed, if they exist. If you're wondering how to handle Windows and Linux paths, check out this RV doc. And if you're wondering how to handle stereo paths and want a full list of supported path types, check out this doc.